Hey, 'tis the season to give the perfect gift. C60 Evo organic oil elixirs and facial serum sets. And here with another sleep tip is our good pal, Chris Burrows, co-founder and chief scientist at C60 Evo. Hey, Chris, welcome back.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. My next tip regarding getting better sleep is related to electronic devices. So we all have these. This cell phone lying around, or we're using it on a regular basis. What a lot of people don't realize is that those devices give off blue light. That blue light is actually tells our bodies, the only time naturally that we see blue light is at the peak of the sun. So when the sun is up at its peak at noon. And so what those devices do, including your computer terminals, your cell phones, your tablets, is they convince our physiology that it's the middle of the day. You can imagine that if you're watching your cell phone or tablet at 10 p.m. and you've somehow convinced your physiology that it's the middle of the day, this is not good for sleep. So it's really important. Most devices have actually blue light blockers, and you can just go out and Google and how to blue light block on my Samsung device or Apple device, or even on your PC or your Mac. Make sure you turn that on. I know people who leave it on all day so that they're never impacted by that blue light. I would recommend 2 hours before the sun is setting in your local area to turn that on. Obviously, it doesn't work if you're working on videos or you're working on pictures, but try and turn that on 2 hours early. And the other thing regarding electronic devices, try to keep them out of the bedroom. I recommend that you actually put a charging station outside of your bedroom so that you just don't even bring it in your bedroom. These devices, as we've kind of been reading and hearing, are like geared to trigger our endorphin responses, and so we like to be on them. They keep them up. So keep it out of the bedroom and make sure you got your blue light blocker on about 2 hours before the sun sets. And I always like sharing sleep tips, because our most consistent testimonial for our product is that people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night.
C60 Evo products deliver noticeable benefits to people and pets around the world. Immunity boost, deeper sleep, just like Chris said, more energy, mental balance, flexibility, and longevity. Please visit the website c60evo.com/Richard-Serrett. And don't forget, use the coupon code EVRS at checkout, EVRS at checkout, and then you save an extra 10%. That can't wait. All right, Chris, we'll talk again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Serrett's Strange Planet, following the truth wherever it leads, exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites, revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality, coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Serrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather around the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Carlos Cagina is our technical producer, and Ryan White is our live stream producer. Be sure to check out my YouTube and Rumble channels, Strange Planet and Richard Serrett Strange Planet. And don't forget to subscribe. We have a new Star Chamber donor in our Patreon subscriber program. Jacob Rybachuk or Rybachuk. Jacob, thank you so much for your generous support. You have no idea how much that means. Thank you so much. Jacob Rybachuk is our latest Star Chamber tier donor. And if you'd like to become an official donor here at Strange Planet, just go to patreon.com/Strange Planet. Patreon.com/Strange Planet. All right. Coming up in the second hour, portals and vortices or vortices. Stephen Ward is a researcher of high strangeness And he'll be here to explore the connections between some modern-day UFO experiences and various traditions of folklore, as well as patterns of and parallels between different unexplained experiences separated by time and geography, like the things that cause vehicle stoppages. UFOs, phantom armies, and cryptids. We'll also try to work in a discussion about the Mothman and Skinwalker Ranch. This hour, is there a subterranean reptilian humanoid civilization here on Earth? John Rhodes is the world's foremost authority on reptilian humanoids or reptilian aliens. His pioneering work investigating claims of reptilian alien contact eventually resulted in the birth of an entirely new genre of study in the UFO community. John's highly controversial perspectives have provided audiences with an entirely new view into the world of cryptozoology, UFOs, underground bases, extraterrestrial life, and inner-terrestrial civilizations. He's lectured both in the U.S. and internationally. He's also appeared on TV shows including MonsterQuest, The Conspiracy Zone, BBC Conspiracies, Animal X, Unsolved Mysteries, and on the History Channel's UFO Hunters, in shows discussing the Dulce Base, America's Secret Underground Tube-Shuttle System, and, of course, the whole Men in Black phenomenon. John is currently residing near Mariposa-Midpines, California, just south of the Yosemite National Park. John, how are you?
Doing great, Richard. How are you?
I'm well. You know, you just reminded me the other day, we were texting back and forth, that the last time we spoke was 2008, 14 years ago. I can't believe it.
A lot has happened since then, hasn't it?
Oh, it's an entire lifetime, it seems. So 14 years ago, that's entirely my bad. So I promise we'll get you back on sooner the next time. It won't be 14 years, I can promise you that.
Yeah, no apologies necessary. It's always a good talk to you.
So the terrestrial reptilian hypothesis, the idea that reptiles, or these reptilians rather, or reptoids, are living here amongst us or beneath our feet. Tell me about how you developed that hypothesis.
Well, it was a number of years ago. I had stumbled across a UFO meeting in Las Vegas, and I didn't know anybody really to go out and socialize with. It was before the internet, was really popular with all the social sites and everything that keeps everybody home. But anyway, I went to this rather eclectic group of people, and I thought, well, this will be kind of fun and fascinating to experience. And coming out of it, I realized that there were one or two people that were claiming not to have contact or sightings of some sort of unusual creature that they interacted with that was akin to like the small diminutive grays that was so popular out there on television, and Whitley Strieber's books had talked about them and such, but rather something that had a reptilian form to it. And when I started hearing these reports, and then I listened to an interview with the coroner in Roswell, New Mexico, when he had been interviewed, he said that the skin of the creatures that they had been asked to get the coffins for, and when he saw them, he said it had beaded skin like that of a lizard. And that seemed to be a very much overlooked point, but I started putting one and one together. And what really sealed it for me is that a paleontologist by the name of Dale Russell, the late Dale Russell, he was working on a model of a dinosaur named Troodon millions of years ago for NASA. And NASA had asked him, how could you project forward what extraterrestrial life would look like? And when he took this upright dinosaur, Troodon, that had eyes that were coming from the side of its head towards the front, giving it binocular vision, and it had 3 fingers and an opposable grasping thumb, and it had a large brain. He took the model of that dinosaur and extrapolated it out over time and said, had it not died out when all the dinosaurs had been wiped off the planet of the Earth over time, this is what it would have looked like. And the model he came up with was a humanoid being that had 2 legs, 2 arms, just like a human does, but its physiology would be definitely reptilian. And when I put all of that together, I started correlating reports from different people across the United States. And then I started posturing the idea that what if we're actually looking at, when we call them extraterrestrials, perhaps we may be looking at something that's terrestrial based and living on our planet, but we just haven't had contact with it. After all, it's only 15% of all life on Earth has ever been cataloged. There's a lot out there still hidden from the human eye, especially in the underground regions.
Right. And if they had sort of an evolutionary jump start on humans and had intelligence, then they would, I guess, have the ability and then the wherewithal and so forth to avoid human contact. But occasionally they have been spotted. So give me a physical description of what we think these. First of all, do we say reptoid or reptilian?
Well, a lot of people out there like to call it different names so they can identify their work from anybody else's. But many years ago, when I first came out with this and tried to introduce it by doing lectures and television appearances during the 90s, we started looking at something that was tall. It was about 6 to 7 feet in height. It had a head that had a rather large back-sloping cranium, and not overly sized, but enough to be noticeable. These creatures looked from a diminutive size up to that of like a linebacker. Very broad shoulders, long arms, very muscular. The 3 fingers with the opposable thumb and claws. Some have been seen with tails or not tails. And their scales on their bodies are very small in areas where they're very flexible, like around the neck and face. And they have large almond-shaped eyes with vertical-shaped pupils, slits for nose, and also a wide lipless mouth that is attached to a very prominent square jaw. And they have a very small pinhole, perhaps behind some scales on their left and right of their head for hearing. And these are the creatures that were described, if you think about it, back in ancient times. And you remember in the Bible, the Genesis story talks about Adam and Eve talking to a snake in the garden. And yes, it's been written as a symbol of evil. But the important thing was the form that was discussed in the more ancient works like the Haggadah actually described the being as having 2 legs and walking upright with arms. And in regards to the word reptilian or reptoids, reptoids is a combination of reptilian and humanoid. So it's a more definitive word. Reptilian could be crocodiles, it could be turtles, it could be a lizard. Reptilian is pretty much anything. So I used that word originally to try and define what people were encountering.
And you mentioned some have tails, some do not. So is this to suggest that there may be more than one, what do we call them, species or race of reptilians?
I believe that there may be actually under the surface of the Earth pocket civilizations of different reptilian beings. And just like there's a variation of humans on the surface of the Earth, there may be a very wide variation of reptilian beings living under our planet. And this is kind of an interesting thought because, you know, it takes the whole discussion when the government says we don't perceive any extraterrestrial threat, then they're actually using like a legal loophole to not discuss whether they're addressing an issue that is terrestrial in nature and not extraterrestrial. And
right.
It's time that we start addressing that and getting more defined in our language on how we, appeal to authorities to come clear on what they know.
That's an excellent point. So when, for example, someone does a FOIA request, they should be very specific in their language, because if we keep making inquiries about what might be out there, that gives the government a loophole to basically, I don't know, continue to obfuscate or just ignore the question. But if we're specific,
Absolutely.
if we're talking,
keeping in mind, that departments like the FBI, most of their employees are attorneys. So, these guys have been taught that everything is according to the language and the punctuation used in the document. They are so important because you can lie about things. You can avoid telling the truth based on the way somebody asked something. And if we're going to proceed asking this question about where are these craft coming from that are descending from 80,000 feet to sea level at 50,000 miles an hour in less than a second, and the government saying they're not ours, they're not the Chinese, they're not the Russians, sooner or later, we're going to be wondering who's controlling them and what do they look like.
Getting back to a little bit about what they look like. They look fearsome. Are they? Are they aggressive?
I would say that from all reports that people have had, and over 70% of them are positive. Okay, there's only 30% of them are negative, and for the last decade or two, people have trolled on that and tried to whip up a lot of fear, when it's not really warranted. But like any wild animal, especially if you meet one out in the woods. Remember, there's people that we have still living in the Amazon that haven't seen an airplane, and they're very primitive from our point of view. And so it is with other creatures on this planet. We may be seeing some that live near surface areas and pocket areas of woods or swamps that may be more primitive and dress more primitively. Meanwhile, there's some that are very advanced, just like there are primitive humans and very advanced humans.
Right. And there are passive humans, and there are aggressive humans, and there are humans that mean ill towards others. So it's a mixed bag with humans. And so similar with reptoids.
Different. Right. Why should it be different for any other animal species? I know that I love dogs, but there's some dogs that you meet that are, because of life's experiences and stuff like that, they're not the best dogs to be around. They're unpredictable. They could charge you, and you just have to sense that and be sensible. I think that anybody having contact with creatures like this, which has apparently happened down near Bishopville, South Carolina in the 1980s.
The lizard man, yeah.
The lizard man, right. And the Christopher Davis that reported this young boy changing a tire in the middle of an area near a field is charged in the middle of the night by something about 6 to 7 feet tall with red glowing eyes, upright on 2 legs, charging him. And when he gets back, he draws a picture, and this is like some sort of dinosaur man. And lizard, it was termed the lizard man, but poor Christopher passed the lie detector tests, and the FBI trained sheriff there, Liston Truesdale, for many decades had to deal with repeated sightings of these things, and it was a very difficult thing for a professional law enforcement officer to have to deal with, because, of course, when it comes to authorities, they like to ridicule it just as much as they do, like any time you report a UFO, somebody in the past 20 years is going to step out in a spacesuit and say, yeah, it's all crazy stuff, in order to just dismiss it. We can't easily dismiss these things anymore.
But given the physical description, they sound like they would have enormous physical strength. Like if they wanted to, if they were aggressive, they could rip us limb from limb.
Many people have had that impression. Okay, and this is where when you're near something that's unusual, you go into some sort of a psychological shock anyway. You get partially paralyzed because you're looking at these vertical slit pupils focusing in on you, and that must be some sort of an experience to have. And most people, they have religious connotations come up in their mind, thinking this must be the devil. Everything I've heard about the devil, this is it. And there must be something evil going on. And, and we have to remember that there are incidents in which people are awake. There's been multiple eyewitnesses. And then there are incidents in which people are having these experiences, similar experiences, but they're in the sleep state. And I believe this is because being exposed to the information, the idea of reptilian humanoids, more or less loosens the reptilian part of our own brains. And then these come out as archetypes and figures in which we see in our dreams to help us figure out issues we're having. And the fear we might relate to that is because we're dealing with part of the brain that is awakened during semi-consciousness, and that's not normally what happens. And just like Carl Jung would say, Carl Jung wore a ring on his finger, and it was an Ouroboros on it. And to him, this was a sacred thing. And he even recognized that the reptilian part of the brain is active and it can play tricks on the brain. So when I've been receiving these reports over the years, and I have to say, okay, this person felt that this was an aggressive situation that took place. Was it really? And then you realize that this person's viewpoint is that all these things are evil around them and demonic, and you can't break them free of that.
How do they communicate?
They've been known to be heard communicating through a series of clicks, as well as one-on-one telepathic communication, in which you hear the spoken word inside your head, more or less. And along with these kind of events, it has been seen that the being was able to manifest some sort of a geometric plasma form outside its own forehead that went forward from it through the forehead of the person having the contact. And when this ball of plasma came out as rudimentary shapes at first and got ever more sophisticated as it got closer to the eyewitness, and the eyewitness felt it more or less touch his forehead, and he blacked out for a second. For many days and weeks afterwards, he had unusual information in his head about the science of optics, and he went and took a laser program course when it had already been closed out to students. But he took the test not knowing anything, and he passed the test and surprised the teacher. And then he started feeling like this wasn't his. How could he have all this information and knowledge in his head? He didn't feel like it was his. And then in some way he felt like manipulated, and he felt like he didn't like that because he was acting on behalf of this creature. Was he, or was he being stimulated in some way he couldn't fully understand? So it's very mysterious.
So the intelligence obviously is, it's off the charts. How many millions of years head start did they have in terms of their evolutionary development? Are they, dinosaurs supposedly died off 65 million years. How far ahead of us are they? Well,
most dinosaurs died off. Paleontologists now are in general agreement scientifically that, the birds are from a stock of dinosaurs. And primarily dinosaurs, we thought, were they cold-blooded or warm-blooded? Because birds came out of dinosaurs. So how did a warm-blooded bird come out of a cold-blooded reptile? See, right. So millions of years, we morphologically change over time. And if you can imagine, what other animal on Earth, other than the descendant of the dinosaurs, such as a parrot, a gray parrot, has reached the vocabulary of 600 plus words to be able to communicate with us and mimic human speech the way it does? It's really quite remarkable, and that's using a bird brain. So, could it be that we actually occupy space that something here has evolved through time with? Remember, originally human beings, mammals, came after the amphibians and the reptiles. And there is a common ancestor to all mammals and reptiles. Deep down in our genetic stock, in the library of information we carry in us, at some tiny, tiny, tiny little level, there are memories of these things regarding our past. That's why when a baby is going through its development, they enter stage of embryogenesis, which means that at times it's very difficult to tell the difference between humans and birds and pigs. For example, we all have tails. And in some instances, babies are born with tails up to 6 inches long.
Right.
They're fully functional. Okay. And in third world countries, they're seen sometimes as unusual omens and they're left alone. But in most first world countries, they're very discreetly removed, by the doctors. because they don't want to give anybody any kind of fearful, bad thoughts. And I've met
the vestigial tale. John, we've got to take a time out. We'll come back and discuss further reptoids with the original crypto hunter, John Rhodes, right here with us for the full hour. Stay with us. Back with more in a moment.
The owners of the system are asleep. Now we can The Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarrett on Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. John Rhodes stays with us. Reptoids.com is the website. Reptoids.com. He's the original crypto hunter. And we're talking about the reptilians who may live right beneath our feet. Now, given their intelligence and their physical prowess, the question that arises is, why are we living on top of on the surface, and they're, down below? They should be ruling this planet, one would think. Or don't they have the numbers?
Well, reptiles have ruled this planet a lot longer than mammals have. I think 190 million years. And it's the nature of a snake to seek the refuge underground, as it is with any intelligent species when it comes to defense systems. Almost all countries in the world now have some form of underground bases. And it's the underside of the earth is much safer. Did you know that it's actually safer to be deep underground during an earthquake than it is on the surface? A lot of people don't know that.
Interesting,
and
right.
It's certainly safer in case of a comet impact. So catastrophism is something that is not generally encouraged in societal discussion, because big business wants you to think in short terms, and they don't want you to suddenly pull your money. But the planet itself shows us often that that Earth goes through some tumultuous times, perhaps cometary impacts, fragmentary body impacts, and such that cause a surface reorganization of all things on the surface almost. And
sorry, go ahead.
The underground seems like a better investment of time to spend. And in addition to this, when you look at the dinosaurs that died out millions of years ago, the last dinosaurs probably to die out are the ones that were accustomed to living in Antarctica. And those are because they were preconditioned to living in a cold climate. And if the asteroid that hit caused some sort of a dimming of sunlight and leading to some sort of a small sort of an ice age coming in, the other equatorial dinosaurs and animals would die off, but the ones in the Antarctica wouldn't. They would most likely, having been used to spending time in darkness and retreating perhaps into cave systems, it may have been their nature to retreat into its cave system and perhaps adapt to living underground. And then they could perhaps have been a form of the dinosaurs that could evolve independently, especially if they encountered a situation where a punctuated equilibrium happened. That's a term that's used to discuss a form of event that occurs on the Earth that suddenly mutations happen seemingly overnight. And
punctuated equilibrium.
Yes, punctuated equilibrium. And because we think that changes happen over long periods of time, but like the sea urchin was an animal that was like a flowery animal all over the oceans of the Earth at one time. And it seemed like overnight, again, relative terms, all of them all over the world turn into these spiny creatures. And it didn't happen independently and spread. It just happened independently. They all changed. And the forces on some sort of change like this are most likely a penetration of our Earth's atmosphere by unusual solar radiations or exotic cosmic rays that come down to the Earth, and that, it changes things at the very smallest levels. That's what might be. We might be going through that right now. I mean, they're talking about cometary fragment impacts happening more often now. I've read that, Earth is moving through some sort of galactic dust cloud that seems to have minimal magnetism per particle, but collectively it has a lot. So things are charging up, and it's not just Earth. Things are changing on the planets inside our own solar system. So it's not just a global warming. So there's something going on.
Is there a singular cataclysmic event that forced, for lack of a better word, forced the reptoids underground? Or can you pinpoint when they likely moved off of the Earth's surface to subterranean dwellings?
Well, the only thing I can surmise is that, hey, 65 million years ago, there was a cataclysmic impact that destroyed pretty much everything, and whatever was left over evolved into birds. So if they changed that much in physical appearance and varied it as much as the bird kingdom is, then how much time does it take for other pocket civilizations to actually take shape, especially when they're not under solar radiation influences anymore, meaning that their mutations could happen more along something of an internal coding rather than an external force and adaptations? Because on the surface of the Earth, it's very dangerous. I mean, it truly is.
It's pretty hostile. That's for sure.
Yeah, they've found shark bones embedded into caves high in mountains. And when they look at the fragmentation of them, they go, this shark had to be traveling at 600 miles an hour. So what's carrying a shark that high up into the mountains and piling it back into a cave? So this idea of continent-wide rolling waves because of a tilt in the Earth's axis or some sort of external body coming near us that shifts us off our axis on occasion, that may be something that occurs. And as well as the solar issue. There's nothing more influential on the planet than the sun. And I think that what we've been going through for many decades here is this argument about, well, it's human cause. No, it's this, it's that. The point being is it appears to be solar cause, and there's nothing they can do about it. If the sun goes quiet, the atmosphere of the Earth, it balloons outwards. And when it's not compact, it allows cosmic rays to make their way down through the atmosphere, and weather starts changing. The Earth starts changing. And the sun is going through erratic behaviors even right now, long periods of acquiescence where it's really quiet. Historically, those times have brought upon the ice ages.
Right.
Even the mini ice age, just recently, where the Thames River was frozen over, and vendors went out on ice skates and set up their wares, and weather changed, and of course, food distribution changes. And I think what we're going now through is a precursor to these times happening again because of global weather change, and also an overt plan to just kind of like pull the world together. And we got to remember, if we're sighting extraterrestrials when they land, do you think they're going to want to set up different negotiations with different leaders of different countries all over, or are they going to tell us to get our act together and have one voice? And that may be what's prompting recent changes in historical senses, really, because we're being pushed very rapidly towards some sort of an event that's going to take place that's going to try and unify the world. Global warming didn't do it. So now we're looking at different things. People are talking about the Chinese threat and the Russian threat and all of this. I really believe that most of these nations have agreements behind the scenes that in which different governments, if there's shadow government of the United States, there's shadow government of China as well as Russia. And these guys may already be in total agreement based on the world and its processes and how things are to be going.
So if we were to be forced underground, would the reptoids be willing to share space down there? Would they be willing to coexist with us, do you think?
Well, a great example of something like that is the Hopi Indians. I had personal friendship with the Hopi tribal leader on the most ancient of the plateaus up there in the older Rabbi village, and he was the traditional chief of the Hopi, Stanley Baneptimwa. And we had talked about the serpent peoples and their specifically in the Grand Canyon area, and how perhaps an underground place was found back there in 1909, April 5th, 1909, in the Arizona Gazette newspaper. They talked about a massive underground city that was found that could basically hold up to 50,000 people in it. and it had, it looked like it had artifacts from Egypt that were deposited in there. And then nobody said anything since. So I said to Stanley, what they discovered in 1909 was that you're opening into the earth. You have legends called the Sipapuni, which is like a hole in the ground. And you said that during manifested disasters in the past, that only certain Hopi were led underground by what they call the ant people.
Right.
And you think of what an ant person is, you got to come up with that, again, this Whitley Strieber gray creature with big eyes, little thin limbs and everything. That's what, from maybe a native's point of view, an ant would look like, and they are underground. And they say that the ant people gave so much of themselves, they became thin and looked the way they do today because of their generosity towards the Hopi that they held underground.
John, pardon the interruption. I've got to take another time out here. We'll come back with John Rhodes, the original crypto hunter, as we continue to delve into the reptilians. Stay with us.
In a democracy, we elect officials.
This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Follow Richard on Twitter at Richard Syrett. For show information, visit the website strangeplanet.ca. As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Radio.
Welcome back. John Rhodes stays with us. The original crypto hunter. Reptoids.com is the website. Reptoids.com. You suggest that they may be living not only underground, but also off-world, and also in an alternate vibrational state of reality. Explain that third one, an alternate vibrational state of reality.
Well, we see how strongly influenced religions have been by the serpent image over time. Originally, the world was united under a serpent image because independently, when these guys took their drugs, they would all kind of see this serpent from within their own reptilian brain. This imagery was so strong that this is what was their standard, regardless if you were a Viking or a Native American here in the United States. They all seemed to worship the serpent. And it was only later that the bird came in, the symbol of the dove or the eagle, the standard in which we live under today, the dominant authoritarian rule. Repeat a little bit of your question again for me.
Oh, just this. So we're talking about how they may also exist in a vibrational state of reality, other dimensions, in other words.
Right, and a great example of that is that people have seen these beings be able to move physically in their space, as well as somehow become semi-translucent and walk through doors or walls as if they did not exist. And I remember specifically a case in which I was dating this girl. She had a friend who was dating a gentleman that was a gardener at a church. And his 16-year-old daughter died in a tragic car accident, and he was devastated. And then, the next time we saw them about a year later, he seemed to be totally recovered. And I said, what a great recovery you've had. And he goes, well, to tell you the truth, he says, I was tending to some roses in the garden, and he says that of the church. And he says, all of a sudden, and I was thinking about my daughter, and all of a sudden I found myself in a different place. And he says, and it looked like it was like a public area, like in Rome or something. And we were sitting on the edge of a fountain, and my daughter was there with me, sitting next to me. And she said, "Don't mourn for me anymore, Father. I'm in a good place. Everything's okay. We all meet up at the end." And then he looked kind of puzzled. And this was said during the dinner we were having. And then I said, well, what's troubling you? And he says, well, the strangest thing is that when she looked at me, she had vertical slit pupils like a snake.
Dear Lord.
He said, right. And I'm wondering in the back of my mind, where are these beings coming from? We know some of them are physical here, but we know there's humans and ghosts. People have seen ghost forms of humans. So are we dealing with some sort of ghost form or non-human, non-physical form of reptilian beings that are occupying another area or a dimension, just like humans occupy perhaps a dimension? And this is why the spirit world and religions are so obviously influenced by these forms too. And so, we're talking about, could creatures actually interact with us through space-time, moving about, and then just, slip in and slip out? We just don't know what we're dealing with. And even then, when we have an open contact, we're never really going to know 100% of the truth.
You also surmise that they may additionally be off-world. So they have bases on other planets. Is that the idea?
Well, if they evolved prior to man and had attained a high intelligence, space exploration is the next great step. So there are ideas out there that are floating around that a contingent of these beings may have actually left the planet to go on a tour of other planets and intend to come back here one day. And when they do, they may claim that Earth is actually their home. They've just been away exploring. And this sets up, when we have governments that have contact, are we dealing with something off our planet? Are they intending to stay? Do they occupy space? And if they occupy space, it brings up all these diplomatic issues about, okay, if you're in the underground, but you're in the territory of the United States, are you an American reptoid? So we have to think about all those potentials that are ahead of us for open contact.
And the UFO phenomena, are most, all, some of the craft that we see, these UAPs, are they terrestrial, piloted by these reptilians coming out from these subterranean bases? Is that your hypothesis as well?
Well, I don't believe they're all. We may have off-world craft here as well, and off-world beings who come here to visit. But it certainly would answer the argument of when people have brought strange metals and things that they found at UFO sighting areas, and they brought them in for inspection. When the analysis comes in and they say these are all terrestrial elements, so therefore they could not be extraterrestrial, case closed. Well, that argument is now gone, because they'd be using all the elements that we have on Earth, just in different scientific ways to come up with unique materials, just like, we came up with graphite and different things. So, the whole argument about coming from far off the planet to visit here, really, we think aliens are going to come from some distant place just to spend 5 minutes and go home? Is it that simple? Or are they going to come here with some sleeping bags and bunker down, perhaps in a cavern system, and park behind the banyan tree or something? Well, my guess is that just like on Star Trek, they'd probably set up some hidden labs in which they'd observe us from a distance. And that may be going on as well.
All right, John, this was a short segment. We'll take another quick timeout, come back. We'll also get to some questions from our YouTube live chat. John Rhodes, the original crypto hunter, reptoids.com, the website. Back with more in a moment.
The truth will set you free. But first, it will really tick you off. Welcome back to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard live, call 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
A few minutes remain with John Rhodes with the Reptoids Research Center. Reptoids.com is the website, reptoids.com. how big is this subterranean civilization? Are they all gathered together in one location, or are they dispersed evenly underneath the ground? And do they communicate with one another down these various populations?
Of course, all of this can be conjecture, but I would imagine that they're distributed across the planet. Some heavier concentrations in areas than others. And I don't know if those would be equatorial or towards the polar regions because of point of origin. There's only about 1/2000th of the Earth's surface has an opening into the ground. So I think that we're talking about a civilization that may be more active in some areas and not. And if they communicate, I would imagine that they do, perhaps in the larger population areas, and then by other means they have different communications to outlying areas that may not be on the same communication system. And of course, this is all conjecture.
Right.
We really don't know. We know that there's probably a higher probability that we're dealing with something that's just unknown, that we've been living with on our planet, and that's the point of origin of a lot of myths and legends. And people have dealt with them from time to time, and we may be coming forward to a time in which we have open contact again.
Would these various populations underground of the reptilians, would they likely be connected with high speed shuttles, tunnels, etc.?
Oh, I would imagine that they would, just like our own government is believed to be, actually very heavily installed underground. The idea of a tube shuttle being built that could take a person from coast to coast to New York to Los Angeles in half an hour, these are all feasible things back with our normal technologies back as far as 1970s. So if an advanced civilization lived underground, I imagine they had something much better even than what we secretly have, linking our own military underground bases across the United States.
And to what extent do you believe are the reptilians cooperating with various militaries and governments around the world in these underground bases?
I do not know. I imagine if we have some sort of a global shadow government agreement on a global scale, that we have taken people from other nations and brought them in to introduce them to these beings so they could go back as representatives to their countries and talk about what's real and what's not real, and also the scientific sharing of knowledge, because this is what really is what it's all about. It's a matter of what technologies could you acquire through negotiated contracts that can be dispersed across the planet so we can proceed with the next novel technology that may not even be of human origin, but we adapted it to our own systems.
All right, let's go to the YouTube live chat. And Magavelli asks, John, have we or the reptilians been to Mars? Do the reptilians live on other planets?
I imagine if they've evolved here, there could be similar stages of evolution happening in other planets that are similarly constructed, and that there's probably mammal and reptile creatures on other planets, and to what degrees they may have evolved intelligence are going to be probably again changing depending on what's happening on their local planet. So yeah, I believe that there's some from other worlds, most definitely. I don't think that we are as unique as we like to think.
Sigma 6 asks, are the reptilians responsible for some of the notorious cases of missing people?
Well, just I guess if you want to think that, you'd have to also put Bigfoot in there. Is Bigfoot responsible? Because again, these are creatures that we've had sightings of, and of course, people have disappeared in park regions, and we don't really know where they go to or where they disappeared to. So all of that, again, is going to be a matter of. It depends on if you like to hug a Bigfoot, don't think about that with them. And if you're like, petting a smooth-scaled lizard, don't think that about them. we just don't know. There's no credible evidence to say that they are directly harmful or have abducted people and taken them to places where they've been terrorized and come back with any kind of physical evidence that anything more than what they have around them. There just hasn't been. Just like we haven't discovered the bone of a reptilian being, but we're conjuring up ideas based on science to figure out, could they actually exist?
Are they under large urban centers? For example, Los Angeles. Would they be under there?
There was a report a number of years ago in which a geologist was searching for a city that the Hopis say that was in the Los Angeles area and that was occupied by what they call the lizard people, and that this was an ancient civilization that lived there, and that Los Angeles was built on that point. So the area of Los Angeles in itself is a very, very important place for different reasons. It could be that some past civilization along the coastline settled there as well. It's really unusual because you can't. I've done television shows in which we've tried to map out the underground of Los Angeles, and they've denied access to the streets to be able to use any kind of seismic equipment to look down underground.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the idea is that they say, well, every building is sensitive, but I think what they're really doing is they don't want you to see exactly how vast the network of tunnels and underground facilities extend all the way around Los Angeles, especially down towards the Redondo Beach, Palos Verdes area, all that El Segundo area where the leading aerospace technology companies are, as well as DoD organizations.
Vic asks, do these creatures have a political setup? If so, what kind of social political system do they have, or might they have?
The only thing that we've been able to determine is that there have been other reptilian beings that have been seen that do not look like the standard ones. They appear to sometimes have white skin like an albino, and also they have wings. And these wings are like large bat-like wings attached to their back. And when they have them folded, they look like these beings have shoulders that are running really high, and then they have this black draping down on it. So it almost looks like their eyes are lower on their chest when it's really the wings coming up behind them. And they seem to be giving instructions to the regular reptilians that do not have the wings. So we've gotten the impression that these guys are somehow in charge. There may be some sort of hierarchy set up based on physical form, how you look. And of course, as far as politics, I have no idea. They may not even deal in politics at all. They may have evolved way past politics. They may have said, look, this is the only people that win this game of politics are the people that created it. So we quit it a long time ago. They probably run their society based more on a business model because of trade, because that's what it always comes down to.
Right. What would they subsist on? What would they grow their own food down there? Would they come up to forage on the surface occasionally?
I imagine that, and they may be have negotiated agreements with our surface governments to take goods down below, meaning they are trucked out of warehouses, go into a hangar, and nothing comes out of a hangar. Just a door opens up and it's empty again, meaning there's lifts going from hangars into tunnel systems for food support and logistical supports for underground bases as well as theirs.
Fascinating. So, John, where can we see you next? Do you have any television specials coming up? Any speaking events?
Well, the speaking events have been mixed for a while. I'm
Yes.
currently working on a unique project that I'll talk to you at some point in the future about. Right now, it's a matter of just kind of like searching things out. Up here in the Mariposa area, I'm still dealing with the discovery of in 1854 of a large cavern that was in excess of 40 miles in distance, and it went from the Yosemite National Park through the Sierra Mountains. And the story appeared everywhere in the United States except in the town of Mariposa, where it originated.
Oh my!
These are the kind these are the kind of stories like the Grand Canyon Underground thing that I found a number of years ago and brought out to the public that has blown up, and TV shows have been done about it and everything. This is a new one, and it's definitely a most interesting story. But it involves, history and the local natives, and the fact that, we might have found underground spaces, massive underground spaces in the past, and then just kept them quiet and didn't want anybody to know about it because we were dealing with, issues in which they may want to later occupy it as an underground facility for some sort of an outpost or something for the U.S. Army.
John, absolutely fascinating. We'll have to do this again soon. We won't leave it 14 years next time, I promise. Thank you so much for this.
Anytime.
John Rhodes, and the website again at the Reptoids Research Center is reptoids.com. Reptoids.com. And when we come back, we'll talk about portals and vortices, Skinwalker Ranch, Mothman, and much more with Steve Ward. Stay with us.
Poking holes in the darkness. The Conspiracy Show.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Well, thanks for inviting me into your home, your long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed basement with the simulated wood paneling, electric fireplace, and the painting of dogs playing poker, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Carlos Cagina is our technical producer. Ryan White is our live stream producer. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube and Rumble channel, Strange Planet. So I'm looking forward to this hour. As we talk about a number of things, the Mothman, window areas or portals and vortices, high strangeness on Bray Road, and modern-day UFO experiences. Steve Ward has been fascinated by the unexplained for over half a century. There were two major events that inspired his interest in the unexplained. Growing up in Michigan, and the March 1966 UFO flap occurred virtually in his backyard. The following November, of course, a winged humanoid chased two couples down a lonely country road near Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The legend of the Mothman was born. Steve would be chasing the Mothman the rest of his life, influenced primarily by the great John Keel and Jacques Vallée. His views on UFOs became unconventional and moved toward a more paranormal explanation. Steve's main area of research is what some call high strangeness, or window areas, as John Keel dubbed them, where disparate types of paranormal phenomena all seem to occur in the same location. And he believes that studying these paranormally active locations may be the key to understanding what the origin behind these manifestations may be. He has his own podcast on the Paranormal UK radio network called The High Strangeness Factor. He's also writing a book, as yet untitled, that deals with the underlying patterns that connect different types of paranormal phenomena throughout history. Steve, welcome. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me on the show.
My pleasure. So it all began with you, the UFO flap in Michigan of 1966. When you say it happened practically in your backyard, explain.
Well, I grew up in the Detroit area, and this wave of sightings, we were getting reports from places like Ann Arbor, Hillsdale, Dexter, and of course these are the ones that some dubbed the swamp gas era, or the swamp gas sightings, because Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who then was the head of Project Blue Book, He was an astronomer at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. He came on the scene, and he was still tied to Project Blue Book. And Hynek had begun to believe that there was really something to this, but he had to kind of straddle the fence between Blue Book wanted him to kind of produce an explanation and just kind of move on. Hynek suggested that some of these things, some of the reports may have been caused by swamp gas or marsh gas. And he was only talking about a few specific reports in the Hillsdale area. But of course, the mainstream press ran with it, and that was their explanation for all UFOs was swamp gas. But I was in junior high at the time. I couldn't drive around playing UFO investigator, and but still these reports were coming in from very credible people. A lot of police officers saw these things. And the Frank Manor farm in Dexter, there was a landing marks were left behind. So it was something that was happening in real time, and it was just of course the press was it treated a lot of the sightings tongue in cheek, unfortunately, as they always have. But it was really a great time to be alive, because that's when all these reports, credible reports, were coming through. In fact, the reason Dr. Hynek showed up on the scene, he went to his master's at Project Blue Book when this wave of sightings started, and he said, "Well, do you want me to go to Michigan and investigate this?" And they said, "No, we haven't gotten any official reports yet." But it turned out that then Senator Gerald Ford, a ways before he became our president, was kind of angry because a lot of the good citizens of Michigan were reporting something, and they were credible people, and he wanted to know why, they weren't on the scene investigating this. So the next day, Hynek was on a plane, and he showed up in Michigan.
The Hillsdale sighting, that was at a school, wasn't it? Wasn't that a mass sighting?
Yes, at that time, Hillsdale School was an all girls' school, and they were watching from their dorm windows, I believe, and they saw these strange lights. Yeah, I'm not sure that swamp gas was actually a good explanation for some of this, but for some of what they saw. But they were seeing these strange lights moving through the woods. But yeah, that was the one sighting. And unfortunately, I mean, I remember that news conference as a kid, seeing it live, where Hynek is in front of all the press people, and he famously, he was given a photograph to look at, to comment on, of George Adamski, the famous contactee, right, who supposedly contacted Orthon in the desert in the early 50s. He's got these classic flying saucer photographs, whatever they may actually be. And Hynek commented that it looks something like a chicken brooder. But so again, he was trying to, he was still tied to the Air Force, which was very frustrating for him. But later years, he did separate from Project Blue Book, started his own UFO organization called the Center for UFO Studies, right, in Evanston, Illinois. And I actually got to see him speak 10 years later at a MUFON symposium in June, I believe it was June of 1976. And it was pretty funny because he called his talk "Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting." So I still have that. I've got that recording somewhere. I was there with my little cassette player, recording the speakers of that symposium, which was a lot of fun. But he reminisced about those days, talked about the mistakes that he made. But he had become one of the good guys now, because he was and he was free to pursue his own research and not worry about some master behind him trying to pull the strings, trying to get him to downplay some of these excellent reports.
So in Michigan in '66, did you have any sightings?
No, I've seen a couple odd things in the sky, but nothing spectacular. I am for the most part a non-experiencer.
Although you have what you call sort of an unconventional view of the UFO phenomenon, that it may be tied more to the paranormal. Do you want to explain how that works?
Yes. Most of us, even including people like J. Allen Hynek, John Keel, most famously known for the Mothman prophecies, Jacques Vallée, author of many books, including Passport to Magonia. Most of us started out looking at the phenomena and suspecting it was, it seemed to be obviously that we should go to the extraterrestrial hypothesis for an explanation. But I was very happy with that back in the 60s. We were seeing these strange craft landing sometimes some entity, perhaps dressed in silver coveralls, would jump out, take soil samples or whatever. Sometimes people were claimed that they were given rides or seen inside these spacecraft. But so that I was very happy with that for a while. But then John Keel, he wrote a couple books actually came out in the 1970s. One of them was called at that time Strange Creatures from Time and Space, and now I think it's called The Guide to Mysterious Beings. And that's where he kind of eased people into it. His what became his very unconventional views that she was trying to account for, why did these things, these strange lights, and sometimes cryptids like Bigfoot or whatever, they would seem to show up out of nowhere. They seemed to be physical. They would leave footprints, perhaps hair samples or whatever. And sometimes the strange lights appeared to be metallic craft. Other times they just seemed to be some kind of light energy or whatever. But he was just trying to account for why is it they sort of show up, either amazed people, sometimes scared the heck out of them, and then kind of vanished. And then here's the book that just, and I've said this 100 times, this is the book that turned my world upside down. And that was when he wrote UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse. And that's where he makes a case that all these things seem to be connected. He talks about patterns, connections, parallels between what seem to be these different types of phenomena. So he in that book, he connected classic haunting phenomena or psychic phenomena, cryptid reports, UFOs and so forth, as all part of the same phenomena. By the way, John Keel considered himself a Fortean. He did not like to be called a ufologist, and of course, a Fortean is a nod to Charles Fort, who wrote those 4 great books, starting with the Book of the Damned, where he accumulated all these different oddities, and a lot of them were out of newspapers or scientific journals, things like falls of fish from the sky, giant ice falls, strange meandering lights, and so forth. So it was. In Trojan Horse, he talks about, he used a term that he borrowed from Ivan Sanderson. Ivan Sanderson, of course, was the great British naturalist, transplanted to New Jersey. He wrote The Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, wrote great books on UFOs. And Sanderson and Keel were colleagues. Well, Keel borrowed a term that he used as a literary device, which was ultra-terrestrial. And it was simply trying to come to grips with this elusive phenomena. Did seem to be kind of reflective of us, of where our consciousness was at a particular time. He used the term paranormal mimicry. Let me just try and give an example. The strange meandering lights that we've seen for centuries through the skies. In modern day, we see a nocturnal light moving in an erratic fashion. We might say, it's a UFO, it's a metallic spaceship from elsewhere. If you go back to another time, in a certain context, some people thought that it was it's a witch riding her broom, carrying her lantern. The dragon tracks of the Chinese, the fairy lights, and so forth. In different eras, these things take on different beliefs. And he also thought that perhaps now Keel's thinking wasn't static. He left the door open for other possibilities, but he talked about transmogrifications of energy. That perhaps whatever these things were, they he thought in fact in the Mothman prophecies he states that perhaps the only objectively real thing about some of these reports are these strange meandering lights. And when people see them, they respond in different ways. Perhaps they're programmed or whatever. It's maybe kind of a natural process. Some people will see a giant triangle UFO going through the skies that other people may not see. Some may see a giant hairy biped wandering into the woods. So he wasn't sure that these things were something that was completely separate from our experience. It seems to me that that perhaps in some of these areas, and I have to stress, there's more than one explanation for all these things, I believe. But it may be that these things have sort of responded to our belief systems at the time, and carrying on that nocturnal light analogy. In an earlier era, around 1897, people were seeing these large dirigible-like spaceships that were they were advanced for our time period, but they weren't super advanced. They were like these big dirigibles or zeppelins really before that technology took over. Then the next phase of the phenomena were the strange ghost flyers, these strange planes that would come from like northern Sweden, way up in the north, and these giant planes with 8 propellers sometimes, and they would shine spotlights down on these small little towns in the middle of nowhere in northern Sweden, and then they seemed to retreat back into the north. So what were they? Were they some kind of a secret civilization or hidden civilization? They couldn't figure out where these things were landing. So you get these continual mysteries, but it just seems that, and when he used the term transmogrification, he thought that perhaps this was, he even used the term of when he talked about ultra-terrestrials, he would use it sometimes interchangeably with elemental, like referring to the little people and so forth. So it's kind of hard to convey Keel in a few paragraphs, but he, because of what he did was, and what I advocate is we listen to the experiencers. What have they reported? Oftentimes, their reports aren't that conventional. If they see a Bigfoot or a UFO, there's this very high strangeness aspect to them. And sometimes they have people would withhold certain details of their experience because they were just too far out. Strange enough seeing a Bigfoot, but if the things seem to vanish in the middle of nowhere, or its footprints seem to stop in the middle of nowhere and then end, that is a little bit harder to explain. Or if they saw what appeared to be a metallic spacecraft of some type physically change shape before their eyes. When you get into these reports, there are just so many oddities that I think, at least it took me away from looking at this as a strictly nuts and bolts, strictly extraterrestrial idea of what they are, although some of those things maybe actually apply to some of the reports.
I had Whitley Strieber on the program last week, and he was recounting some of the strange events, talk about high strangeness that occurred at his vacation home in Kingston, New York back in December of 1985. And he mentioned seeing an old high school friend in the midst of, I guess this was sort of a recovered memory, perhaps through hypnosis. A forensic hypnotist helped them recover this memory of seeing a childhood friend who had since died, and then on a subsequent event, friends had come over to the vacation property, and someone else had sort of a similar experience, seeing a dead friend in conjunction with, seeing strange lights and so forth. And it seems to me John Keel had something very similar. He was visited, I believe, at his apartment in New York. He spent the afternoon with somebody, an old friend, spent hours with him talking. And then later he discovered that person had been dead for several years.
and that was something he kept close to his vest for a long time, and he did not mention it in the Mothman Prophecies book because, while he wrote about some pretty wild stuff, that's really wild. But earlier, if you read things like Trojan Horse, Our Haunted Planet, and so forth, he would talk about how that wasn't terribly uncommon, where people would see a landing or whatever. And the entities that are associated with UFOs are quite varied. I mean, nowadays we just seem to be talking mostly about the grays. But he said there were times when people would say that they had seen a dead relative or somebody that, like you said, that they knew was dead, would walk off the craft and greet them. Now, it's really bizarre. I think researcher Joshua Cutchin is working on a book that might deal with some of these areas, but it's just another way that it pulls in something we consider a paranormal, the dead appearing, and so there was another one of the famous contactees, not as well known as George Adamski, but a lady named Dana Howard. She claimed that she was contacting a woman named Diane from Venus. Well, her first contact with this entity was through a classic seance. This apparition entity or whatever seemed to materialize, called herself Diane, and otherwise it was sort of a classic contactee experience. Later on, she claimed that they were actual real experiences where she met this being and had a ride on a spaceship or whatever. But regardless of how we don't know how true that may be or what she actually experienced, very interesting that the first with many contactees, they supposedly had their experience out in a very remote area, and here she is having it with a seance. But yeah, there are Keel kept finding these bizarre patterns. Even some of the reports of let me just digress for a minute. The grays, the classic grays, the big-headed guys with the big black eyes, little bodies, they really didn't seem to show up in mass until late 70s, early 80s. You could find reports that seemed a little bit like a gray, but we had quite a variety of entities prior to that. If you've ever read Jim and Cora Lorenzen of the formerly of the unfortunately now defunct Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, they wrote great books that just fascinated me as a kid called Flying Saucer Occupants. He would go through some of they would go through some of the same classic cases like the Flatwoods Monster, the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins, and so forth. But I wonder if Keel is onto something about part of this being reflective in nature. It was late 70s, we had Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where essentially you had a bunch of sort of pale grays in that film. Whitley Strieber, you just mentioned him, the classic cover of his first book on UFOs called Communion. It was like this stuff was perhaps impressed on in human consciousness. And then it seemed like we started getting more and more people experiencing encounters with these grays. So, it could also be, if it's a very physical phenomena, it could be that the grays are the big kids on the block that have pushed out all the others. But if you look back at the wide variety of types of craft that have been reported, the type of entity, and the type of experience, well, you have the general categories where they are similar. Sometimes small beings, dwarfs, giants, sometimes things that look very inhuman. It is such a wide variety that when you get down to the specifics, it's very hard to find, 2 or 3 entities that are identical, okay. 2 or 3 craft that are perhaps identical.
Steve, got to jump in here. We'll take a quick time out. We'll come back. Researcher of high strangeness, Stephen Ward, stays with us. Back with more in a moment. Don't go away.
Loose lips sink ships.
Welcome back to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. We're now crossing a zone of turbulence. Please return your seats and food trays to their upright position and make sure your carry-on luggage is safely stowed. You're about to leave everything you know behind. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Follow Richard on Twitter @Richard Syrett. For show information, visit the website strangeplanet.ca.
Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
Stephen Ward is with us, and we are talking about high strangeness. How do we listen to the high strangeness factor on the Paranormal UK radio network, Steve?
Yeah, you can if you just Google that, the Paranormal UK radio network, high strangeness factor, my name, Steve Ward, you will find it. It's you can download it on Spreaker, Podbean, I believe. There should be several platforms. And did a show to commemorate my third anniversary, which is kind of nice. After thinking I would never do something like this, have a podcast. So it's been great to talk to quite a variety of fascinating people. And like one was over a year ago was Alan Godfrey, who was had a famous abduction experience. He was a police officer in Todmorden in England in 1980. And he had a missing time experience, and he followed up on it several months later. And it was kind of a classic experience, which had it actually had some of the overtones of folklore and so forth. We mentioned Jacques Vallée earlier, and that's another thing another factor that comes in is when you look at various traditions in folklore. And then compare those elements to some modern day UFO experiences. You think, wow, it's almost like it's a seamless progression or connection between both types of phenomena. And just one example, we're very familiar with the missing time aspects of abduction experiences. Well, people would experience missing time when they encountered the fairies or the elementals or the good people, and they would a young boy might be playing ball with the fairies, and he thinks just an hour has gone by. He's been gone all day. Sometimes when you look at the descriptions of the entities, the what we think of as ETs in their little coveralls or whatever, and then if you look at the classic manifestation or experience with one of the elementals, if you were to exchange clothing with them, in some cases they're virtually indistinguishable. So now instead of being whisked away to an unscheduled medical exam, oftentimes people would end up in perhaps a cave or inside a mountain or whatever. And of course, sometimes some of the modern day experiences, people believe they've been taken to a underground facility. So there are just many interesting parallels between, and Jacques Vallée first approached this in his book Passport to Magonia. That book I read after Trojan Horse, and I was barely recovering from Trojan Horse, which at first I really resisted because I was very comfortable with the idea of these things being ET. Some of them may well be, some of them may be very physical and maybe come from other planets, but yeah, the Trojan Magonia just kind of put the last nail in the coffin for me of my earlier viewpoint of these things.
Well, I was reading, it was an interview with Jacques Vallée in Wired magazine recently, and he said that, here he is after what, probably 6 decades studying this. He has no clue after all this time, he has no clue what this is all about. He says he firmly believes the truth is out there, but he's just at a complete loss to explain.
Well, his books are really fascinating. I actually, last month or so, I found an old cassette in the basement cleaning out, and it was marked on there save, which was unusual. Usually when I would record stuff off the radio or whatever, I was very specific. But so I put this in a cassette player, and it was an interview with Jacques Vallée from '91 from a local Detroit talk station, WXYT it was. And the local guy there, Mark Scott, who was mostly a political guy, still, and was very fascinated by, he was reading Jacques Vallée's Revelations. Revelations is part of a trilogy that followed some years after Magonia, Confrontations, Revelations, and Dimensions. And they're having a great conversation while I'm listening to this thing. And then I hear me. I'm one of the callers that called in. I had completely forgotten. I kind of remembered that I had recorded it at work that day because I'd heard he was going to be on. But to my great surprise, I'm immortalized from 30 years ago on, and it was great. I had a nice conversation with him. I certainly wasn't the only caller, but it was was pretty phenomenal to actually. I've never met him, and I never got to meet John Keel, but it was great to. And there were other callers that were very interesting too. So it was really a great segment.
So we were talking earlier about the 1966 UFO flap in Michigan, and the other event that sort of I changed the trajectory of your life was in November of '66, and then into 1967, and that was of course the Mothman sighting, starting with two couples that saw this large flying man with glowing red eyes and 10-foot wingspan following along their car, the Scarberries and the Millettes, I believe. How do you view that experience? Because ultimately, I think something like 100 people reported seeing this, and they all sort of gave a similar. It varied, but there was kind of a similar description of this creature.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the Mothman?
Well, it was. I remember seeing the first report. This is the Scarberries and the Mallets were two married couples. They were driving around what they still call the T&T area, which is about 6 miles north of Point Pleasant. This was an old munitions area where they developed explosives for World War II, and they would store these things in these concrete igloos, of which there's about 100 of them over this area, which is now called the McClintock Wildlife Area, long abandoned. But if you look at the old photographs in the 1940s, you see this just incredible complex that they had there, and so that's where they first saw this thing. And you're right. Keel originally chronicled a little over 100 people that saw this thing. Most of the reports were similar. There were some variations, and some people saw something quite different, like Tom Urey saw something more like a thunderbird. But it was, as you said, 6 or 7 feet tall, dark in color, gray or black, 10-foot wingspan, piercing red glowing eyes. Linda Scarberry, who I got a chance to talk to a few years before she passed on, said that it seemed like it had its wing caught in the fence or whatever. But they saw this thing, and they were just absolutely startled. They hit the gas, and they took off south on Route 62, which takes them back into Point Pleasant, and this thing chased their car. So, and when I first heard about it, and that particular sighting hit the wire services. It went all over the world, and this was even before they had dubbed it Mothman. Some of the locals just called it the bird, and apparently some creative copy editor dubbed him Mothman. The Batman TV show was on at the time and very popular, so it was probably just a play on Batman. Whatever it was, it didn't really have any characteristics of a moth, and it was hard. The head or the eyes seemed to be almost kind of sunken in its chest, or the head was very low or whatever. But the thing is, when I first read that as a kid, it was fascinating. And so that's when I around that time period and following, I would start reading. I was reading articles by John Keel, and he would allude to his investigations at times. Now, it was maybe 10 years later that he actually wrote the Mothman Prophecies, but he gave us some tantalizing stories and some of the things that he discovered in Point Pleasant at that time, and talked about the credible people that saw this thing. Now, I'm always looking for patterns and connections and parallels. We're familiar with conjunctivitis,
Yes.
eye burn, or whatever.
Pink eye.
Pink eye. When people have been in close proximity to a strange light, whether it looks like a metallic craft or it just looks like a blob of light, sometimes they experience this malady. Well, one of the primary witnesses, a young lady named Connie Carpenter, saw this thing. She was driving by the Mason County golf course, and it was standing there. Now, the Mothman was quite of a paradox, because sometimes it would be seen taking off straight like a helicopter. Like no bird of any description or size is going to do that. That's what she saw. Sometimes it would seem to put its wings behind it and then just take off straight up. But she saw this thing, was terrified and mesmerized by the red glowing eyes. In the days following, she developed conjunctivitis, something that is mostly associated with some kind of a strange or unexplained or unidentified craft in the sky.
Steve,
so that was
pardon the interruption.
Yes.
I've got to jump in here. We're going to break away,
Sure.
and we'll come back and continue to discuss the Mothman. Stephen Ward, researcher of high strangeness. Back with more in a moment. Stay with us.
Peering into the shadows.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. The truth will set you free. But first, it will really tick you off. Welcome back to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Both had to leave Toronto to chase Andy at 1-866-740-4740.
And we are back with Steve Ward. And you can hear him on the Paranormal UK radio network, and his podcast is called The High Strangeness Factor. The High Strangeness Factor. If you go to strangeplanet.ca and under tonight's show information, and just click on Steve's name, that will take you right to the Paranormal UK radio network, and then you can find his podcast. And is that every other Tuesday?
Yes, it comes up every other Tuesday. It's a podcast that you can download once it's up, and all the shows are there for the past 3 years.
Fantastic. So we were talking about the Mothman, and this one witness, after seeing it, developed a case of conjunctivitis or pink eye. So I sort of interrupted you in the middle of that story. Continue.
Yeah, that was actually when John Keel first appeared on the scene. He asked. He was at, I think it was Mrs. DeWitt's house, and they gathered together several people that had seen this thing recently, so he was able to interview them. Something else he found, and other researchers, there was a Swedish researcher whose name I don't recall, but he was also a colleague of Keel, kind of followed him in a year or two later and interviewed many of the same witnesses.
Oh, was that Brunvand? Jan Harold Brunvand, I think.
No, I think this was a different one.
Okay.
He made some really good friendships with several of the Swedish researchers, but they were finding that a lot of the people that had a sighting of the Mothman would go home and they would have an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena. Of course, poltergeist phenomena is where things seem to fly around the room or whatever inexplicably. It's an experience that is as old as we are. But what the heck? You know, why would people seeing this creature experienced something like that. It was the Mothman had many problems with it, trying to put it in a physical realm. The way obviously the wings didn't work well. A 10-foot wingspan probably wouldn't lift something that's 6 or 7 feet tall. Some people that had a close proximity encounter with it said they heard something like a humming or machinery or something like that. Keel got some of those reports. So it may have even left footprints by the Old North power plant. Keel found sets of different types of footprints, but some kind of weird-looking skinny footprints that may be attributed to the creature or not. He also found large dog-like footprints, something that today we would associate with the dog man. And he and Ivan Sanderson and other subsequent researchers have all said that you will find these kinds of footprints in these paranormal hotspots. So that's fascinating. I mean, they weren't really reporting dogman like sightings, but something was making these things. And so, how do we? That's what I find so fascinating. How do we reconcile these different aspects that seem like they should go into another category?
Right. And to further complicate things, we have the connection between the Mothman and the collapse of the Silver Bridge in December of '67. What is the connection there?
Well, you'll talk to some people. Some believe that this creature actually caused it. Others thought it was more of a harbinger, like a banshee. My problem is these harbingers are, how we, if there actually is there trying to warn us, the messages are very deceptive. It's very difficult. Nobody looked at the bridge, even those that some people were getting prophetic dreams or whatever. Keel believed that he was in contact, by the way, with several people. This is where the prophecies comes in, from the Mothman prophecies. There were several what he called silent contactees. And these are people that believed that they were in contact with some kind of a being, a space brother, some kind of a higher intelligence, and they would be given prophecies that would sometimes come true. But at some point, sometimes they would get the big prophecy, like the there's going to be a mass landing on the hill and get your buddies out there, and then it would be gone. The same general thing happened with the leading up to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. He was getting messages from these contactees that didn't know each other. He called them silent contactees because they weren't particularly interested in any publicity, but they were telling him that their sources, the messages that we're getting, it was leading up to some kind of an EM effect. And the implication was there was going to be some kind of a tragedy on the Ohio River. Keel believed it was going to be one of the factories, perhaps, going to blow up. And he talked to Mary Heyer. Mary Heyer was Mary Heyer was a local reporter that became a friend and colleague. And they would actually go down a little bit south of Point Pleasant and watch the strange meandering lights go over every night. They were so plentiful. But he told Mary that not to tell anybody of his suspicions, because if a factory did blow up, the first person they're going to go to is this guy that prophesied it, wondering if he planted the bomb.
Steve, this was a short segment.
Okay.
We'll take another quick time. We'll come back and continue to delve into the Mothman and the collapse of the Silver Bridge, time permitting. We'll talk about Bray Road, maybe even Skinwalker Ranch. Back with Steve Ward right after these.
Fasten your seatbelt and put your tray in the
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
This is the Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarrett on Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. A few minutes remain with Steve Ward, host of The High Strangeness Factor, the podcast heard at the Paranormal UK radio network. We're talking about, among other things, the Mothman prophecy. And you were in the midst of telling the story about John Keel and Mary Heyer, who was a newspaper reporter. If memory serves, she was played by Laura Linney in the Mothman prophecies. A terrific actress. So continue on with that story. Heyer and Keel would be watching the strange lights around Point Pleasant.
And these messages were telling, and again, I remind people that these were coming from people that didn't know each other. Well, they started talking about this EM effect that was going to take place on December 15th. The closer it got to the date, they would get more specific information. The moment when President Johnson turned on the lights for the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, there was supposed to be some kind of a tragedy take place. I think 3 days of darkness and whatever, they weren't specific about what this EM effect meant. Well, what happened was, now Keel by this time was, he admitted how paranoid he got. It was interesting to hear him interviewed on Art Bell, Coast to Coast. He hadn't done an interview for a long time, but when the film came out, he granted that interview, and he said the one thing that the film really nailed was the paranoia that I felt at the time. Well, at the moment that this EM effect was supposed to take place, he saw the messages come over the TV set that the Silver Bridge that joined Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio, had collapsed. This is December 15th, 1967, and it's in lower 20 degrees, and the sun is almost down. The bridge is filled with rush hour traffic, and the whole thing just collapses in a few moments into the Ohio River, and 46 people lost their life. So I don't know that the Mothman was significant, in toward the tragedy or trying to warn people or whatever. I think it happened with all the other high strangeness that went on at the time. When you look at other areas, other high strangeness areas, oftentimes there seems to be sort of a predominant cryptid involved, sometimes more than one. Look at the Skinwalker Ranch that has been on television, the book by Knapp and Kelleher, The Hunt for the Skinwalker. So it was, I tend not to believe that this being or whatever caused the bridge collapse, but you look at that year of all the strange lights, missing time, visits by so-called men in black. It's just one of those classic areas that still happens now and then today. There are other areas where this wide variety of phenomena seems to take place, and it's very hard to understand what the connections are. But it does seem that it can't be just a mere coincidence that all these different types of haunting, cryptid, UFO, meandering light phenomena all takes place in one area.
Well, Appalachia seems to be a real hot spot. I spoke with a gentleman who wrote a book about haunted hollows and hills in Greene County, which is, I guess, the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania, and it's often cited as one of the most haunted locations in North America. And then you mentioned Skinwalker. Is there a common thread there, do you think? I don't know. Is there something about these physical locations when we're talking about portals? Is there something in the soil composition, high iron content? Sometimes we hear about limestone. I mean, what's going on there?
That I don't know. There are people that are a lot smarter than I am have talked about things like limestone and quartz, and perhaps the physical makeup of the geography sort of allows these things or helps these things to become manifest. But it's just it's such a impenetrable mystery as to why these things all happen in the same area, and there are so many of them. Like Marley Woods, the Bridgewater Triangle out in Massachusetts. It's something that I don't have a grasp on yet as to why certain areas seem to be real hotspots for all these different types of phenomena.
Do you think there's any? Was it Frank Myers, the researcher, talked about? I think it was Myers who talked about perhaps the role of electromagnetic fields.
Perhaps it does. It does seem like people will get readings off the charts in these areas with their meters and so forth, but it's not always consistent. It's almost like that window opens a little ways, and the phenomena takes place. Where you can get physical readings, even cast physical footprints of these things, and then it closes again, and like Brigadoon, it just shows up once in a while. But in the Point Pleasant area, people still have weird experiences, but it doesn't seem to have the high level that it did there. Even the Skinwalker Ranch, it has a lot of activity, but they talk about how back in the 90s it really peaked. I mean, it was crazy, the things that were going on there. So that's what we're trying to figure out, and I wish I had a great answer. Maybe when I finish my book one day, I'll have all the answers.
Well, speaking about EMF and so forth, and some people are more sensitive to electrical fields than others. Do you think that might explain why some people seem to have these experiences and others do not? Perhaps their brains are wired somewhat differently?
It may very well. Keel believed early on that certain people were naturally psychic. There were certain people that were wired a certain way that would be more apt to have some of these experiences. Maybe that's why I've had one bizarre experience in my life, really. But so many of these people, in fact, you said that sometimes the same person that would experience a UFO, and that's why he had this great catchphrase. He said, ask the contactee, meaning the experiencer, what he or she had for breakfast, and not literally what they actually ate for breakfast, but find out all about that individual, because he found that they, from the time of childhood or whatever, like look at Whitley Strieber. He found out that he was having these experiences as a young child, and his family was as well. Well, so many of these people were having would have experiences, bizarre paranormal experiences all their life. And, living in haunted houses, seeing strange lights, having missing time and so forth. But there does seem to be that for whatever reason, certain people are more tuned in and prone to this. And he found that somebody, I talked to a lady in New Hampshire a few years ago who had a missing time experience. So I asked her a series of John Keel style questions. And I found out that they were experiencing classic haunting phenomena. Her sons were seeing orbs inside and outside the house. Just all kinds of things that fit the pattern. And then I asked her, I said, this is going to sound crazy, but have you ever seen anything, any kind of an animal that you couldn't identify or just looked very strange? And she said, no. And then she said, well, wait a minute. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law near this property both saw something strange in the woods. This thing was seen 2 different times, and it was something like a panther-like creature, but it was standing on 2 legs. So I got all kinds of. She was seeing shadow people. I never would have, if I was frozen in the 1960s, believing that these things were ET, I would have said to she and her husband, well, I hope you make a breakthrough with the missing time. And I would have never known to ask all these other questions because, and I've talked to other people like this, Stan Gordon has, the Pennsylvania researcher, Rosemary Ellen Guiley found an interesting connection between people that were experiencing, having abduction experiences, and they were also experiencing classic shadow people experiences. So there's something that binds these all things together. There's something where some people seem to have many of these experiences, whereas others have absolutely none or very few.
Right. I think this stuff maybe drives the people in the sort of the UFO community, if I can use that term. It must drive them nuts because it's like it's muddying the water for them. They're married to this idea of, whatever is piloting these craft must be of extraterrestrial origin. But as you're describing, it is so much more complicated than that. Again, going back to my conversation with Whitley Strieber, and this idea that, this is what we're describing really maybe is our reality. But there's only, a certain percentage of us that actually get to experience it. But it's all around us all the time.
Yes. And it's something you can't put in a laboratory. I remember reading the Hunt for the Skinwalker, and that they had documented a couple hundred different types of paranormal events, but they weren't repeating themselves. These things are all substantially different. How do you apply the scientific method to something that is so plentiful, but that doesn't actually repeat itself, so that you can analyze it using the scientific method?
Steve, I really enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you. We'll have to do this again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Steve Ward. And don't forget, the podcast is called The High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. All right, that's it for me. My thanks to Carlos and Ryan. I'll be back next week with a brand new show. We've got a good one lined up for you. I think we're going to do 2 hours on the Illuminati and a major book they've just come out with at Inner-Traditions, a translation, a translation on the Illuminati book. So we'll plan on that for next week. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.
Hey, 'tis the season to give the perfect gift. C60 Evo organic oil elixirs and facial serum sets. And here with another sleep tip is our good pal, Chris Burrows, co-founder and chief scientist at C60 Evo. Hey, Chris, welcome back.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. My next tip regarding getting better sleep is related to electronic devices. So we all have these, this cell phone lying around, or we're using it on a regular basis. What a lot of people don't realize is that those devices give off blue light. That blue light is actually tells our bodies, the only time naturally that we see blue light is at the peak of the sun. So when the sun is up at its peak at noon. And so what those devices do, including your computer terminals, your cell phones, your tablets, is they convince our physiology that it's the middle of the day. You can imagine that if you're watching your cell phone or tablet at 10 p.m. and you've somehow convinced your physiology that it's the middle of the day, this is not good for sleep. So it's really important. Most devices have actually blue light blockers, and you can just go out and Google and how to blue light block on my Samsung device or Apple device, or even on your PC or your Mac. Make sure you turn that on. I know people who leave it on all day so that they're never impacted by that blue light. I would recommend 2 hours before the sun is setting in your local area to turn that on. Obviously doesn't work if you're working on videos or you're working on pictures, but try and turn that on 2 hours early. And the other thing regarding electronic devices, try to keep them out of the bedroom. I recommend that you actually put a charging station outside of your bedroom so that you just don't even bring it in your bedroom. These devices, as we've kind of been reading and hearing, are like geared to trigger our endorphin responses, and so we like to be on them. They keep them up. So keep it out of the bedroom and make sure you got your blue light blocker on about 2 hours before the sun sets. And I always like sharing sleep tips, because our most consistent testimonial for our product is that people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night.
C60 Evo products deliver noticeable benefits to people and pets around the world. Immunity boost, deeper sleep, just like Chris said, more energy, mental balance, flexibility, and longevity. Please visit the website c60evo.com/Richard-Sarrett. And don't forget, use the coupon code EVRS at checkout, EVRS at checkout, and then you save an extra 10%. That can't wait. All right, Chris, we'll talk again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.